it defined that and what we call cloud computing today. Please help me welcome Dr. Werner Vogels.
And here I'm talking to the most successful software as a service company in Africa.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, because what makes this super exciting for me is that I'm not just hosting this fireside chat as a fan, which I've always been, but as a fellow CTO in SeamlessHR. So it's
It becomes more fun if we don't agree.
So it's been amazing, and I've gone through what you've done. I've gone through strides and watch some of what you've spoken about and your passion, and how I've seen that you are, apart from just being CTO at Amazon, you are a developer advocate, and especially for development culture, and also you like to build resilient teams that build products that scale. So it's an honor to be here, because that's also something we stand for in engineering in SeamlessHR. How do you keep innovating when you have short-term goals? There's this customer problem that I want to solve now, but I'm thinking of the long term.
Yep.
2 years, 3 years, this is how this product should be architected. How have you balanced that?
Yeah.
What's your advice to that?
Yeah. There's this famous book, I think by Curtis Christensen, that's called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he observed that companies that had been successful, had a great success with their first product, actually had a trouble with product number 2 and product number 3, but they were not as going as fast and as successful as product number 1. So why was that? And that has to do with the way that we make decisions. Some decisions that you make are what I would call reversible. You can step back. Yeah, if decisions are reversible, you don't need to have all the information before you can start to get going. And often this is if you build a completely new product and it's the first product that you're building and you're gung-ho because you're really motivated and you just do it. Yeah, you take these risks and you move fast. And if you make decisions, you know that if it's not really the right decision, I can take 2 steps back and start again. Nobody's getting hurt. And then there are the other type of decisions, the ones that are irreversible. The things you cannot back out of once you've made that decision. Yeah? If you sold your car to someone, you can't go there 2 weeks later saying, I changed my mind, I want my car back. Doesn't work like that. Some decisions are irreversible. Yeah? That means you need to take time to make that decision. And you need to be deliberate about that. So you need to understand what are the decisions. Now, often when you're a young business, your first product, you really know this. You know when you need to move fast. You know when you need to be a bit more careful. Second product, third product, people are starting to treat reversible decisions as irreversible.
Yeah.
Suddenly, you're having meetings about everything. Every decision is being taken as if it is irreversible, and we need to talk it to death before we're going to do it. Yeah. Now, and that means that as a company, you become slower. You don't move as fast anymore. Yeah. So continue to look for those kind of things where you can make fast decisions on, because if you messed up, you can get yourself out of it again. And really continue to look for those things that here we need to have meetings about. We need to sit down and carefully think about how to do that. Now,
yeah,
let me give you one more mechanism. One more mechanism. I really want to get this one out. I don't know how it works in your company, but if someone proposes something new, there's always someone in the room that says, that won't work. Our customers won't like that. Or, oh, that won't scale. Yeah. And these are just what I would call throwaway statements. Like you state, and suddenly the person that proposes something new has to do all the work to convince everybody that sort of claims to know that it won't work. So at Amazon, we've turned this one around. Yeah, it's called the institutional yes. You propose something new. Yeah. If someone objects to it, they need to do the work. They need to read the work to write a document why we should not be doing this. Takes care of 95% of all objections. Yeah. It does mean that we probably are doing things we shouldn't be doing sometimes. Also, if someone does write that document, you better pay attention. Because probably someone has an insight that you didn't have. Now, documents play an extremely important role within Amazon. Meetings, I don't know how you have meetings. At Amazon meetings, no PowerPoint, no presentations. Why? Because if you do a presentation, you can fake it. Yeah, you can make broad statements on a slide and sort of without going really into details. By the way, half of the room is probably arguing with you when you're at slide number 3. The other half of the room is on their phone. Yeah. What we do at Amazon, we have a process called the 6-pager. People have to write a document instead of presenting. What then happens, the first 20 minutes of a meeting, we read this document in silence. After that 20 minutes, everybody has exactly the same information, and you can have a very informed, high-quality decision-making process. It is also very hard to write those documents, because if you don't have clarity of mind, it is very hard to write a clear document. Yeah. So if you want to propose something, it's half-baked. You write this document and you look at it yourself, you put it in the door, you wait a few days, you read the document and go like, I don't know yet. Yeah. And so writing, not only that the process seems to be a bit heavyweight, but it means that proposals come to you, if it's right, very high quality, well thought of, clarity of thought, and you can have a very high quality process of decision making. By the way, I've been in enough meetings where after reading 2 pages of the document, you go like, maybe you should try this again. Yeah. Because, there's obvious ways like using data. Yeah. But using data in a way that actually hasn't any basis, like sort of broad statements, like 75% of customers like this. Oh, where did you get that from? Yeah. How do you know that?
Yeah.
Things like that. So it is a heavyweight process. It also means that if you do quite a few of these meetings, I don't have to read before I go into a meeting. Would it be the first time that you come in? I mean, if you have to have read documents before you go into a meeting, you ask everybody in the meeting, have you read the document? And everybody says yes. And half of them are lying.
Yeah.
Or you skimmed the document. Yeah. So like, oh yeah, I know this. Oh, we're going to talk about that one. Yeah. And so as such, the other thing is high quality decision making before 12 o'clock. Your mind is much fresher in the morning to take very high quality decisions and take this information into you. Yeah. So if you need to make hard decisions, make them in the morning when your brain is sort of still operating at full scale. And wait a bit. And it doesn't mean that the afternoons are useless, but the pure creativity in your head sometimes is just better in the early mornings.
There's something else you are passionate about, which is frugal architecture. And while in Africa here, it's not a choice, it's a constraint for us. We have to deliver scalable application. We have to deliver applications that are resilient, but yet cost effective. So I want to hear what's your thought?
So there is something called, what I call Jefferson's paradox. It's a well-known economic paradox. And you can apply it these days to all the AI stuff as well, where everybody says, oh, AI will take away all your jobs. Yeah, right. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Not because AI is not good enough, it's you're still going to be responsible for whatever AI does for you. Yeah, so you'll be in business. You'll be in charge of that. AI predicts, you decide. Anyway, so going back to the early days of cloud computing, there's something, Jefferson's paradox says that if you do things more efficient, you're going to do a lot more of it. Yeah, it's not just that you do this one thing then more efficiently. Suddenly you go faster. So early days of cloud, I wrote up a document, or actually on the first reInvent, a big user conference, had this list of basically 12 points that I thought were development principles for in the cloud. Because I thought in the cloud you would develop things very differently than that you would do on premise. One of those principles was you can now build cost-aware architectures. Why? Because in the past you needed to pay upfront for your database and you're stuck with that for 5 years. But in the cloud, you only had to pay for what you've used. So your architectural decisions came back as a dollar amount. And I didn't want to be that the consequence. I wanted you to think about cost when you're doing your architecture. Like, does this thing really need to be 4.9 available? Of course, your business, yes. Business says everything needs to be 4.9s available. Right? Well, maybe not everything. And then you tell the business, yeah, but it's going to cost you this much per customer, per unit shipped, per whatever your unit is, per new onboarding of a new company that uses your software, and then per seat in that company. This is what it's going to cost you. Nobody did that. They did all the other things that I advised them to do. Like if you run production software, you should run in 2 AZs in 2 data centers at least, so that if one fails, your software is still running and available for your customers. But for some reason, customers seem to sort of, what they did do is move much faster. Suddenly, because in their own data centers, they had been constrained by their hardware. This was all they could do and nothing more than that. Believe me, my own Amazon engineers were like that. Yeah. They were also very creative within those constraints. Because suddenly you had this box, and if you wanted to do something more that actually didn't really fit in the box, you needed to be creative how to actually make that work. And in retail, for example, before we had cloud, I had to buy hardware to support the business. If I bought too much hardware, my CFO would be very unhappy. If I didn't buy enough hardware, my customers would be unhappy. Yeah. So, I mean, we were really good in predicting sort of what we expected, what the coming trend of customers was going to be in the coming year. So we were really good at that. Except then you have something like Black Friday that has 4 times as much traffic. And believe me, you don't run servers in just 2 days before that. Yeah. So buying hardware and things like that. And so it really, and I mean, retail, so margins are razor thin. I can't buy too much hardware because otherwise I eat into the margins of the business. And so, and then just 5 days before Black Friday, a team will come to you and say, "Very brilliant idea. You know what? We're going to do X, Y, or Z, and it's going to deliver $10 million in free cash flow." And I go like, wait, we don't have the capacity for that. We can't. No, we have been carefully planning this, what's going to happen. But you know what? We always made it work. You always found a way, in one way or another, architecturally or technically, to still make it work within the constraints that you had. Now, cloud removed those constraints. Now, suddenly everybody could go wild, go do whatever they want because there was unlimited capacity at the fingertips. And if it didn't work out, then you just pulled the plug on it. You hadn't bought hardware for it. So most companies did this. For most companies, the removal of the constraint meant they were happy. They could move fast. They could innovate. They could build all sorts of products that they could never have built before. They could be more successful. And believe me, a lot of companies went that way. Remember, without cloud computing, we wouldn't have Dropbox. You would not have Uber. You would not have Airbnb. You would not have Spotify. All of those companies grew up on the cloud because they could prove that they could scale. Think about a company like Dropbox. Now, imagine that you would want to do Dropbox without cloud. That means before you've even written one line of code, you need to go to an investor and ask them for $50 million for hardware. Before you've ever done your company, the investor's going to look at you and say, no. On cloud, however, they could start off. They could start building. They didn't have to think much about cost. They could prove the concept of Dropbox working. Then, when the Series A comes around, suddenly they could prove that they had the viable software, it could work, and the rest is history. Yeah, they're now a publicly traded company, whatever. None of these companies could have been built without cloud computing because they could innovate fast, they could grow like mad, or not grow at all, or have features that didn't really work out. And if it didn't work out, it probably didn't cost that much money. So, those companies then a few years ago, a number of years ago, it was sort of an economic downturn in the Western world. Suddenly, CIOs started to go like, should this really cost me this much money? Yeah, we're doing all these things. Yeah, and I go like, 10 years ago, I told you that you should be cost aware when you build your architectures, but you didn't. Well, I didn't say it like that. Yeah, I did say these are the 12 lessons we wrote up 7 of them. These are the 7 big lessons that I've learned from building cost-aware architectures. Such that, now, first of all, is that you need to make sure that cost is what I would call a non-functional requirement. Yeah. By the way, we built a website called thefrugalarchitect.com. There's lots of documentation on there, all the things that we've learned. But we've also been doing podcasts with other companies, with engineers at other companies that actually have integrated sort of frugality principles in their business. So if you're interested in this concept, go there. I'm not going to talk about all of those. I'm going to talk about 2 of the things. One of them is that you need to upfront take cost into account when you build your architecture. It needs to be one of these things. Or then let me say, I'll do 3 things. One of them is, indeed, you need to think up front. If a cost is something that you build your architecture and then you're going to tell the business how much it's going to cost them, you're too late. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah? When you build a new feature, you need to think over which dimensions am I going to make money? Where's my revenue going to come in over? Then my costs are allowed to grow over that same dimension, but not over another dimension. Yeah. I stupidly invested in a company personally at some moment that made one of these massive mistakes in this world. This was before there was Wi-Fi and 4G everywhere. These guys were making these small Wi-Fi devices that ran over 4G. And so you could have Wi-Fi, you could connect to that, be anywhere in the world. You would have a Wi-Fi connection. And every time you needed to pay 10 gig data package for it. Yeah. They got customers that said like, we would like an unlimited data package. These guys were successful because, the margin they had for on top of these each 10 Gs was fixed. They knew exactly how much money they were making. Then customers were asking, can we have an unlimited data package? We don't care how much we have to pay for it. It can be expensive, but we don't want to deal with these 10 gigs every time. Okay, we'll do an unlimited data package. It costs expensive. Customers do it. What do those customers do the moment they have an unlimited data package? Start watching Netflix over it. 24/7. This company went out of business because their costs were not in the same relation as their revenue. Yeah. Those 2 things, because suddenly their costs were going off with 24/7 Netflix, but there was a fixed price for their unlimited data package. They had no control. These 2 things were not related to each other. So in your head, when you build your architecture and your operations, you have to think about where's my money coming in over. And then if that's a dimension, in your case, maybe per customer, per seat, per whatever number of operations or whatever your charging model is going to be should influence your architecture. If you have a subscription model, you better know how much costs each of those subscriptions are going to be. Yeah. If you have a pay-as-you-go model, it's much easier. But you still need to know where your customers are going to pay you for. Yeah. And so those things are important in terms of architectural decisions up front. Secondly, you need to be able, as an engineer and as an architect, to have a conversation with the business about how much they're willing to pay for this. Yeah. Is every piece of your architecture, does that really need to be 4 lines? Then have a conversation with the business and saying, yeah, those pieces are really important for our customers. We want to invest extra in that to make sure that's always available. But maybe some other pieces are not. And the last thing that I want advice of those 7 laws or whatever we call them, is that to make sure that everybody sees how much money you're spending on AWS. And it sounds weird, but remember that before cloud, if you would be a developer, you would probably have a developer desktop and you would have a little server under your desk. When you would go home, you would leave it running. Why? Because who cares? Yeah, you didn't switch it off. In the cloud, when you go home, you better switch the lights off. Because if you keep your development environment running overnight, it's going to cost your company money. So if you have a little screen somewhere in the room where most of the developers sit that says the cost of development at this moment, and if you don't switch off your development environment, you see that cost going down, that's motivating. Yeah. Let me tell you, and that whole idea comes out of something that we experienced a long time ago. This is also a story from before you were born. Kind of story. One of those. Yeah. 1972 in the Netherlands, my home country. There was what's called an oil crisis. Yeah. Those were the days of all the hijackings and things like that with these airplanes and stuff like that. And we had what was called carless Sundays. Nobody was allowed to drive their car on a Sunday just to save oil. We also did a lot of research in those days in why certain houses were using so much more energy than other houses. And the same type of family lives in, the houses were the same, but some were using 50% more electricity than the others. You know what the difference was between those two houses? The ones that were using more electricity had their electricity meter in the basement. The ones that were using less electricity had the electricity meter in the hallway. Every time when they would come into the house, they would see how much electricity they were using, and it would influence their behavior. If it will be in the basement, you will never see it, and it wouldn't change your behavior. Yeah? The same is, if you think about if cost is so important in your architectures, then you need to make it explicit, and you need to make sure that everybody that works on that can see those costs. And it's not just us as engineers, it's also, the business stakeholders or whatever you want to call them. Show them on a daily basis what their costs are. And because sometimes business folks have an idea, they're brilliant new idea, we need to go do this. Yeah. And you don't want to be the bad guy in the room the whole time that says, yeah, but it's going to cost you. Yeah. Just make those costs explicit. If you make cost explicit, it changes behavior.
Thank you very much.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.